Well, it is a joy to be with you all and welcoming, well, she needs no introduction, Ursula Burns. But in case you just needed to be reminded, she, of course, was been the CEO of Xerox, the chair of Xerox, now the chair of Teneo, the key consulting and basically CEO chair whisperer there. But you're also on the board of ExxonMobil, Uber, Endeavor. Philanthropically, you're very focused, whether it be the New York Ballet, whether it be, of course, on the Ford Foundation as well, and your key focus on the board Diversity Action Alliance. Ursula, welcome to 2022. Welcome to looking at the year ahead. And you know Chuck Robbins so well yourself. You're speaking to him monthly, if not weekly, if not daily, and many other CEOs and chair people. What are they saying? What is their number one concern right now?
Yeah, I think that, as chairwoman of Teneo, I have the advantage or the benefit of having a lot of interaction with business leaders in the C-suite. And 2022 is a year that is forcing them, based on the last 2 years, to take stock in their businesses. I mean, almost from the very basic level, what is their strategy? How are they going to engage, to engage and motivate their employees? How are they going to deal with diversity, equity, and inclusion? How are they going to deal with the environment? How are they going to deal with government changes, just a geopolitical situation around the world? So most CEOs who are engaging with Teneo, we had a record year in 2021, primarily because of the situation that our business leaders are facing, which is a large amount of uncertainty. I just heard Chuck speak about cyber. It's another area that is just high on the list of change and on the minds of CEOs. The good news is that everybody's starting in the same place, so no one is behind or ahead right now. The good news is that there is still a lot of technology advantage and technology that we can leverage out there, and people are looking for help. People are looking for help and assistance to, lay a new course for their businesses.
Yeah, laying a new course is an interesting one. I go back to, I should have mentioned, of course, you're an author, your memoir, Where You Are Is Not Who You Are. And looking back at some of the writings that you make there, you talk about how you joined the Business Roundtable in 2009, newly as CEO of Xerox. And oddly, there's a sense of deja vu in many of the things that you were facing then. You talk about this, what brought you together were issues of taxation, issues of supply chain due to the ports in California. Well, hello, that comes ringing back to us now. People to fill boards. And that is still a lot of the issues that face people now. Talk to us about really the way in which you're trying to see leadership come together to change what leadership looks like, particularly at a board level.
One of the very exciting things about the last 3 years, as devastating, 2.5 years, as devastating as the last 2.5 years has been from an economic perspective, from a health perspective, it was a catalyst for an acceleration of things that were just popping their head up before. Now, where business leaders are, and I'm going to get to diversity as a specific example of this in a minute, where business leaders are now is that they can no longer avoid or delay some of the items and issues that some of us had seen for a long time. The environment, and dealing with the environment in a way that's transparent, that is a leadership perspective, so leading, not just doing the bare minimum, dealing with diversity, equity, and inclusion in that way as well, where what we're seeing in our work, what Teneo is seeing in the work that we do with business leaders, is there's an increasing number of businesses that are putting in hard metrics for the C-suite to achieve, and that are aligned with pay. This is in the US, this is a very, very new phenomena. We've been speaking about diversity, equity, and inclusion for a long time. We've been speaking about board representation, diverse board representation for a long time, and C-suite representation. And what we're seeing is an increasing number of business leaders, businesses, boards, saying we're going to now treat this like some of the other metrics that are very important: growth, profitability, EBITDA growth, whatever, all of the financial metrics that we measure down to the penny. We're going to start putting in metrics and measure and align your compensation to progress in the DEI metrics as well. This is, I think, I don't believe that we can go backwards on this. This is not, I said this before we had any work. I thought that the human outcry after George Floyd was one that we were not going to be able to tamp down easily. And it seems that it's true that we're not going to be able to tamp that down, that boards that are more diverse now than ever before and are increasing in their diversity, not only gender diversity, but also race and ethnicity diversity, those boards are starting to have a bigger and bigger presence and a louder and louder voice. And that's, I think, good for business across the board.
It's interesting that you sort of highlight there that basically money talks, in the respect that if you put a monetary unit, an amount of pay to it, it will force an act of change. How much do you think that's also investor-led? Because a lot of this is about where money flows. When we look at environment that you just paid lip service to there and thought focus to, you know, you of course on the board of ExxonMobil, my goodness, have we seen change at that particular business? And has that been something that investors needed to push on, or have boards been able to get ahead of it, do you think?
No, I think that I was remiss in not saying investors earlier. One of the more positive outcomes and aspects of the work that the BDAA, the Board Diversity Action Alliance, and other organizations like this, we're not the only people who are pushing this, has been able to see is that investors and investor groups are one of the best advocates for change, obviously, right? And they are the holders of the money. They are the pockets of business. And as investors, you spoke about it in ESG and ExxonMobil, as investors became very serious about this topic, companies had to react. And if they did not react, the investors speak with their wallet and with their vote. So we're seeing that in diversity, equity, and inclusion. We're seeing it in ESG. We're seeing it in just what we call good wages, just good work, part of the ESG, how we treat our workers, et cetera. So investors are a very, very important part. Another important part that's becoming more and more clear today is what I call it the worker-led movement. I talked to you, I think 2 years ago about this at the very beginning of COVID. I said, one of the things that we have to watch out for and be very careful of and lead, if you're a good leader, if you're a good business leader, you have to get ahead of the power of the worker, meaning be in concert with your workers. Right now, we are struggling, business everywhere. There's not an institution I'm engaged with, which is kind of hard to imagine that's not dealing with how do they get people to come to the company? How do they keep them engaged and motivated and excited? And they know it's not just pay. It's about how they feel about the work that the business is doing. It's about how they feel that they fit into these environments. So diversity, equity, inclusion, ESG, all of these movements are now becoming embedded in corporations because investors, employees, consumers are all on top of this as well. And I think it's a great time to be a business leader. It's a time that you have permission to change, permission to speak up, permission to try things, permission to experiment on what a lot of people call, and I like to hear the words, a more inclusive capitalist structure. That's basically what is happening today.
Actually, what's so interesting, going back to what you mentioned before that struck me, was you're saying no one's actually ahead or behind here. Everyone's still got a fighting chance. I'm interested though, some people must be deploying a focus on culture that you think is better than others. Where are the business leaders that are doing it right, making it work for them? Where do you think some of the biggest strides are being made?
Yeah, I'm going to be very selfish here in my response because I spend a lot of time with the 4 organizations I'm going to mention, and they are, and they just, I think, differentiating themselves. I'll start with the Ford Foundation. They have been a leader across the board in engaging their employees, in dealing with and thinking about the impact that this organization has on the world. And they are definitely a leader in DEI. And not only in what they advocate for, but how Darren Walker runs the organization. It's stellar. The second is surprisingly Uber. I say this surprisingly because it had such a shaky start, but Dara, the CEO, and the board, from the time that I've joined to now, has made a concerted effort to be a listening, engaging, a progressive corporation. There's still lots to do. They're in a very new space, but across the board in ESG and DEI and how they engage their employees, Dara and Uber is really leaning forward and leading in this new space. They have to. I mean, they're in a very competitive space. The third very important organization is Teneo. Teneo went through ups and downs, and I joined it as the chairwoman, and I'm not tooting my own horn here, but this is a company, an organization that had a couple of one near-death experience, and used that to fundamentally build on the strengths that it had across the board. What are their values? What do they stand for? How do they support their clients? How do they think about the world? How do they engage more people? Just a very, very well done, I think, leadership example. And Paul Carey, the guy who runs Teneo now, is doing an excellent job there. And then, the final organization I'll talk about is the Mayo Clinic. I'm on the board of the Mayo Clinic as well. And this is an organization that was under the weight. You can imagine what it has to go through under the weight of COVID. And they did this engagement with the world, engagement with the communities they serve in exactly in almost a spiritual way, the way that you would want a healthcare provider who has in their hands the solutions to many people's problems, how you should do this: engaging broadly diversity, engaging innovation, engaging risk across the board so that they can actually be better providers. All four of these organizations are, and I could mention some others that I'm not associated with as well. But I think it's a time that that business leaders have some permission and some cover to take risks. Government leaders have permission and cover to take risk as well. I wish they would act a little bit faster than they are right now. But I think it's an interesting time because it could be risky. It's really bad. Profits we thought would be lower. Costs are going to be higher. It turns out it didn't turn out that way at all. By the way, on Wall Street and Main Street's still suffering. And that's one of the things that these companies have to turn their eyes towards, which is how do we engage more broadly Main Street.
Talk about that, because we are still at a point where this feels like a K-shaped recovery. It still feels like inequality is building, not receding. Yes, we all perhaps are far more aware of it, but you have written so painfully clearly, like the touch, the sense, the smell, the feel of poverty because you lived it. Mm-hmm. How are you now looking at perhaps drawing out some of those unconscious biases when it comes to education, when it comes to, allowing people to not have to just get into university because they can swim a lap of a pool, and what are the elements of change that you're seeing on the ground to help Main Street at the moment when we sit here perhaps slightly removed and far closer to Wall Street for our sins?
Yeah, I mean, Caroline, this is one of my biggest struggles and one of the areas that keeps me kind of going every day, understanding, realizing, having been a victim of or a recipient of just a level of weight, a weight that you have nothing to do with creating, but you actually live under every day. The way that we have to deal with it in the spaces that we are very close to Wall Street, not as close anymore to Main Street, is we have to engage as broadly as possible. First, in the companies that we deal with, CNN, Bloomberg, boards that we work with, whatever it is, we have to actually be aware of the work environment that we have and create a better one. That work environment includes philanthropy. It includes outreach by your employees. It includes you engaging with the communities that you work in and live in. So that's one. Other is you got to support not-for-profits or NGOs or whatever it is that you're passionate about. Everything from schools to social justice organizations to arts organizations. Literally, the idea that we literally have our pocket of money and grace and whatever it is, and we go out every day with our hands on it and come back with a little bit more is something that should make us feel a little bit uncomfortable, particularly if we have not shared that broadly. And the second thing to do is to absolutely engage and share it broadly. And then the third is we have to advocate for change at the highest levels of government and the highest levels of business. diversity is what we were speaking about, we should have diverse boards. Plain and simple, this is like an old conversation that is almost ridiculous to keep talking about. The fact that we don't have one should be a question about where have you been? We should have governments that actually look out for the people who are least able to look out for themselves, that they should create swim lanes for good business, swim lanes for innovation, swim lanes for great education. And we have to engage. This is no longer, I've been on this horse for a while. This is no longer a time when the people who have money and power can sit back and not advocate for change that allows more of the population of the world, and in this case, very specifically, the United States, to participate more broadly, more easily, in a more graceful and fun way with the riches of the world. And right now, we're making progress, Caroline. This is not, it's dead. We're making progress from 2 years ago. The benefit of the pandemic is that people are starting to look up and say, man, this probably wasn't anywhere near as good as we thought it was. So we have to actually redo certain things. I heard the very end of Chuck Robbins' interview, and he was talking about innovation and how, there were things we thought would never be possible. Literally, having board meetings where no one is in the same room. This was almost an anathema. You couldn't do this. Now it is the par for the course. It's the way it's done. By the way, it can't be this way for all board meetings. But we've proven to ourselves that we don't have to waste a whole bunch of fossil fuels by flying to a place to have a meeting for 3 hours and then flying home. Not probably very useful. So there are a whole bunch of things that we've learned and are learning that are fundamental changes to the law, right, of the way business was done, the law of the way we selected boards and leaders, the law of the way that we looked at people who had less. All that's changing.
Do you feel the accountability level is there? Is there a risk, as we all hope that we understand this virus more, we start to be able to return to the office in whatever way the companies and the boards that you speak to of, we want to reclaim the fun that we've all missed, and we stop holding ourselves accountable?
Big risk. Absolutely risk. And here's the way that we mitigate that risk. We keep talking. We keep acting, we keep doing, we don't silence. You look at some of the old crusades for everything from workers' rights to, worker safety to, diversity, anything, worker pay, executive pay, anything you want. The way that it gets done is there's not these guys who are doing it over there. These guys are us guys, right? Particularly in America, these guys are us guys. And the way that we don't lose ground is that we don't allow ourselves to relax until the journey is done. I don't want people to believe that this is like this unbelievable drudgery. You get up every single day and you carry the cross up the hill of diversity, of ESG. No, you engage in a very useful, in a very joyous way. You engage around the possibilities, and that's what I think is going to keep us going. That's what's going to keep the country and the world from sliding back. They're better, the angels of our soul that a great book I read a while ago. I think it was by Pinckney. It's a true, violence is lower today than it's ever been in before. And why? You would think, from what we see, it's worse. It's because people do learn and people do get better and people don't back off.
Let's be joyous now. We've only got a minute left, but there's one phrase that sticks with me from your memoir, and it's one that your mum always used to you, and it is, don't let the world happen to you, you happen to the world. What are you going to happen to this world in 2022? Because you just helped us think about how we can have a little bit more accountability. What joy are you going to bring, and what focus are you going to have?
This is something that's interesting. I don't do resolutions generally.
Me neither.
I can't keep them, but this is a year that was kind of strange. So I started with the idea that I was going to say one thing. I was going to pick a word and try to live by that word. And the word that I picked was purposeful. And it was more focused on me to make sure that I didn't waste time and energy on things without so everything has to have a purpose this year. Obviously, Caroline, that's not going to be the case. I'm going to fail more than I succeed here. But the idea is that I do have a bully pulpit. I do have resources. I do have the power to get certain things moved along. And I have to make sure that I just keep being very purposeful in the use of those things, because it's no longer, it has never really been, but it's clearly no longer about me alone. I have 2 children. I have nieces and nephews, only two, two nieces, and lots of young people. I have neighbors. The world is not set yet. We have to kind of keep making it a better place. And that's what I'm trying to be purposeful this year on just about every action towards a good and positive reaction in the world. I'm hoping I could be a little bit better than I've been in the past on that.
Well, we are so thankful that we made it, that the Bloomberg Year Ahead made it into that purpose, and that we hope that you made impact through this conversation. And as always, you do it with such grace. We thank you so much, Ursula Burns, chair of Teneo, but on so many other boards, and making our impact felt every day. Stay well. Thank you.
Thank you so much.